Hey guys, okay, so for those of you that have watched my videos for a while, you'll know that I actually find a lot of importance in the transit of Venus. And there's a couple of reasons that I actually think that we need to pay attention to the transit of Venus. One reason is because for me, when I'm trying to understand what we can expect in the future in regards to Earth changes and cosmic events and even cataclysmic events, is that we need to look to our ancient wisdom keepers. And then this brings me to the Maya. Now the Maya also found great importance in the transit of Venus. In fact, they probably watched Venus as much as they watched the sun. So I think that that is reason enough for us to also understand that the transit of Venus is something that is significant and something that we should pay attention to. Now the other reason I also found the transit of Venus as something important is because I came across the research of a guy called Will Hart. And Will Hart has actually started correlating a lot of very cataclysmic events on our planet to the transit of Venus, that these events actually occurred in a year where Venus transited the Sun. Now one such event was the Krakatoa explosion, and most of you would know that that volcanic explosion was probably one of the most severe that we can remember in living memory. In fact, it was pretty much heard around the world 3 times. That's how intense this explosion was. So that happened in a year where there was the transit of Venus. Now another event happened in 2004, and 2004 was also a year in which we saw the transit of Venus. And this is the year that we saw the Indonesian tsunami. And once again, that was an event that was pretty extreme. You know, we probably haven't experienced a tsunami that devastated so much coastline and so many communities and killed so many people in living memory once again. Now, it's also interesting to note that the transit of Venus comes in pairs. So the 2004 transit of Venus is paired with the 2012 transit of Venus, which is in June 4th and 5th. So anyway, so that's some interesting information and background information in regards to the transit of Venus. So what I decided to do was see if I could actually correlate the transit of Venus to other types of events, in particular solar storms and space weather. And I've hit pay dirt. I actually discovered that indeed we did have a very intense solar storm in 1882, and the storm was called the Transit of Venus Storm. So what I'll do is I'll read you some of the information that was published at that time in regards to this Transit of Venus Storm. So this one says, all telegraphic transactions east of the Mississippi River and north of Washington, D.C. came to a halt. The Chicago stock market was severely affected all day. November 17, a superb aurora was witnessed, the culminating feature of which was the appearance at about 6 o'clock in the evening of a beam of greenish light in the shape of something like a cigar and many degrees in length, which rose in the east and crossed the sky at a pace much quicker than but nearly as even as that of the sun, moon or stars, till it set in the west 2 minutes after its rising. So that in itself is a very interesting event. To have something that looks like a cigar move across the sky faster than the sun and the moon, I mean, that in itself says that there are certain events that we probably don't even truly fathom or understand that we can expect to happen when we are experiencing geomagnetic storms and anomalies. So here are some articles from newspapers around that time. So this one is from the New York Times, November 18, 1882. A storm of the century. Telegraph operation east of the Mississippi River and north of Washington, D.C. was severely affected. Wires with earth circuits were unusable, though systems using the newer metallic circuits were unaffected. Buried cables and above-ground cables were equally affected. People who attempted to use telephones heard buzzing or ringing noises. The Savannah Morning News, November 18, 1882. An electric storm, widespread disturbances. The impact of the storm was reported to be felt throughout the country. It is the worst storm of its kind in years and extends throughout the US and Canada. A report from New York says that Europe was also affected. The switchboard at Chicago Western Union office was set on fire several times, and much damage to equipment was done. From Milwaukee, the volunteer electric current was at one time strong enough to light up an electric lamp. Kansas City Evening Star, November 18, 1882. Enraged electricity, a wonderful storm that demoralized telegraph operators. The Chicago switchboard was on fire. Half a dozen keys on the instruments were melted. The storm covered the region north of Kansas beyond Omaha and New York. There was enough current in the Milwaukee lines to light a lamp. By 5 p.m., fewer than 500 words had been transmitted by the Associated Press. And then this one from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Intense magnetic storm. Skies were overcast, so no aurora could be seen because only Earth circuits were affected. No one that used a complete metallic circuit. It was claimed that the magnetic disturbances came from the Earth and not from the atmosphere. Interesting. And then this one here, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and this was on November the 20th. The magnetic storm. Storm extended from Boston and as far west as Ogden. Aurora very brilliant in Omaha. At St. Paul, the sky was blood red. Cheyenne reported a brilliance as bright as daylight. In Denver, the northern heavens were filled. It was also seen as far south as San Diego, California. And then we have the Omaha Herald, which was published November 19, 1882. The electric storm at Olympia, Washington Territory. The aurora was spectacular. San Francisco reported that the aurora could be seen from San Diego. The oldest residents of the state do not recall a previous display as brilliant. And then we have a report that's in the Science Journal. Now, the Science Journal is the publication that scientific papers are published in. And this one says, the magnetic storm and aurora, a collection of 23 accounts. The storm began on November the 16th from England and reached its climax on the morning of the 17th between 10 and 11 a.m. GMT. A remarkable sunspot was observed, the largest ever photographed from Greenwich. An observer in Edinburgh said that surely this event would convince even Simon Newcomb that the strong aurora would go along with the sunspot cycle. The most remarkable phenomenon was a rapidly moving shaft or cigar-shaped cloud that was observed streaking through the southern sky from England, and the following accounts are in Nature and describe this event and speculations by many of the observers about its cause. So isn't that very interesting, that anomaly? So I'm not saying that we can, actually experience this. It's nothing that is concrete that we're going to get one of these solar events as well. But what I'm saying is that we just need to take everything into account. We need to connect the dots and we need to prepare, because we've got to understand that this solar cycle 24 has been one that the sun has behaved in a way that scientists don't really understand. I mean, we've had the biggest CME that they've ever witnessed. We've got these magnetic filaments, these huge magnetic filaments that are millions of kilometers across, that they've never actually observed on the sun before either. And we've also got the transit of Venus occurring in June on the 4th and the 5th. So all I'm saying is that we need to use this information to empower ourselves and understand that these events can happen and have happened in the past. But if they happen now, it's not just going to be telegraphic wires that are catching on fire, and this is just not going to be the extent of what we can expect if we have one of these storms of this intensity. We have to understand that everything is going to crumble. The whole matrix is based upon the electric grids, and once that goes, then this is going to be an event that many people will not survive if they're not prepared. So I just found it really interesting that this storm happened around the transit of Venus, that the Maya revered Venus and observed Venus intensely, especially the transits of Venus, and that we also have a transit of Venus in June this year that was paired with the 2004 transit of Venus. So I will post this link underneath and you can have a look at it all if you like, but I just found it all really interesting, and once again it's just a matter of connecting dots and trying to understand what these changes are on our sun and what we may expect in these times in regards to changes on our planet and changes in the cosmos. So anyway, guys, thanks for listening and peace out.
So as we ask ourselves a very fundamental question, could a species be energetically transformed? We're now zeroing in on the core question of how this interplanetary climate change that was predicted from these readings in the 1950s, which we'll see a bit later, could indeed lead to biological evolution of you and me on Earth, something that in fact might already be happening right now. We now look at the work of Dr. Thyalwaysseek, a Chinese scientist whose work has been picked up and analyzed by Russian scientists. What he found was a DNA transformation that was through nothing more than a wave itself. As you see in this diagram, you have number 4 being a duck and number 6 being a chicken. Of course, they're not anatomically correct. It's a very simple diagram. But what you're looking at is that the duck, number 4, is inside a pentagonal room, a 5-sided room. All the number 2s that you see in this diagram represent funnels in which air can pass through and also energy could pass through. Then, after the funnels, you see those orange lines which actually represent copper pipes that go from the funnel to the other room where the pregnant chicken is being held. Now, the pregnant chicken is very important because there's eggs that are developing inside the chicken's womb. What you see with number 3 is a microwave generator. Now, this was not a lethal dose of microwaves. He didn't kill the duck, but he did excite the duck's DNA with microwave energy. Now, what happened was really phenomenal because as the duck's DNA was being excited, those energy patterns went over into the room with the chicken. Now let's look briefly at this image of a duck. You can see that the duck has a long beak, it has a long neck, it has large internal organs, and if you look down at the feet, you can clearly see that there's webbing between the toes. When we look at this picture of a chicken, you can see the chicken's beak is much shorter, you can see there's no webbing between the toes, and in fact the length of the neck is much shorter. Now, it was a synchronicity. It just so happened that I was looking for these pictures online, and when I found this picture of the chicken, it happened to be a chicken who was raising ducks. Now, of course, when the eggs hatched, they didn't look exactly like ducks, but what they did look like was really phenomenal. As you see in the next picture, there's webbing on the feet, and in fact, they were called duck hens. The webbing grew on feet of eggs that were laid from a chicken. Chicken feet don't have webbing. Chicken feet are supposed to have naked toes. And as you look in this next image, you can clearly see that the head of the duck hen looks more like a duck than it does like a chicken. In fact, we have some very specific statistics we can look at here in which 500 eggs were zapped through the chicken. Of those 500 chicken eggs that were zapped, 480 of them actually hatched. 80% of the eggs that hatched had a flat duck-shaped head as they developed. 90% had a shift in the position of the eyes where the eye actually moved back on the skull to the position it normally would be on the head of a duck. And 25% of them actually had webbing that grew between the toes. This is phenomenal because what it shows is that the genetic material of the chicken was spontaneously rewritten inside the womb so that when those eggs laid, they became half duck, half chicken creatures. That completely bypasses traditional Darwinian models of evolution. So you see how it is totally possible to explain evolution that has occurred on the Earth as being existing more primitive species that are energetically rewritten into more complex forms of life later on. Well, we can also look to the work of Dr. Peter Garriev, who took this even a step further. And what he did is to take eggs that had been laid by a frog and then zap them with a laser light that had gone through eggs laid from a salamander. Now, a salamander is considered a more primitive form of life than a frog. One of the unique qualities of a salamander is that you can cut off one of his limbs and the limb will actually regrow. The salamander has the power of regeneration, whereas the frog does not. So in this sense, you could almost say that it dialed the DNA backwards in evolution a bit. Because what happened when you redirect laser light through a salamander's embryos into a frog egg is that the frog egg has a complete metamorphosis, and what comes out is a fully healthy salamander, not a frog. Now, this is a scientific revolution in the making because it suggests that you can have a complete transformation from one species to another within one generation. Your parent could be one creature, you lay the egg develops into a completely different creature, and the only thing that you need to make that transition possible is the actual wave information that rewrites the DNA. It's almost as if DNA is like a jigsaw puzzle that has more than one solution. And this really changes how we see life and how we see evolution. It could very well be the engine of evolution.
This morning the sky, it was blue, but now it's turned to gray, overcast. I see the reflection in your eyes as they do a 10-mile high drive. Hush now, baby, don't you cry as Grandma is singing you lullaby. She says, don't worry, baby, someday soon we're gonna eat the rich. The Secretary of Defense may conduct biological experiments. I guess Granny never told you sometimes life can be